The Valdorian Empire had precisely 347 laws, which was impressive considering they ruled over 6,000 planets. What was less impressive was that approximately 332 of those laws essentially boiled down to don't annoy anyone important, with varying degrees of linguistic flourish. The remaining 15 covered the really serious stuff, like proper waste disposal on agricultural moons and the correct way to address a magistrate's third cousin twice removed. Breaking any of these laws led to the pits, always the pit. The Valdorians had the creativity of a broken replicator when it came to punishment. The human currently being dragged through the crystal corridors of the royal palace had violated law number 47, unauthorized emotional display in the presence of nobility. Apparently, laughing, when Duke Fenix spilled fermented Glorash juice down his ceremonial robes, qualified as a capital offense. Who knew the universe's supposedly most advanced civilization had the collective sense of humor of a constipated diplomat? The guards hauling her forward were Hurricti, 7-foot-tall reptilian warriors, whose scales glinted like oil slicks under the palace's bioluminescent lighting. They'd been bred for war, modified for loyalty, and apparently trained to walk in perfect synchronization because their footsteps echoed through the halls like a very intimidating metronome. The humans' own feet dragged uselessly between them, because apparently the arrest protocol didn't include letting the condemned maintain their dignity, or their footing. King Vorthan XVIII sat on his throne of compressed starlight, which was exactly as pretentious as it sounded. The throne room stretched upward for 3 stories, all decorated with the conquests of the Valdorian Empire, banners from defeated worlds, weapons from extinct species, and one really uncomfortable-looking taxidermied creature that might have been a pet or possibly a former advisor. With the Valdorians it was genuinely hard to tell. The king himself was humanoid in the way that a praying mantis is humanoid if you squint and have had several drinks. His elongated face bore 3 eyes arranged in a triangle, his skin shimmered between purple and black depending on his mood, and his fingers ended in claws that he currently drummed against the armrest with the enthusiasm of someone who already knew how this conversation would end. "The human stands accused," announced Chancellor Yux, a bureaucrat who'd perfected the art of looking down his nose at people despite having his nose located approximately where his left ear should be, "of disrespect, mockery, and general failure to appreciate the solemnity of noble suffering." The human said nothing, mostly because the Hurricti had very specifically been squeezing her shoulders in the universal gesture for shut your mouth or lose it. "Do you deny these charges?" King Vorthan asked, his voice carrying the bored inflection of someone asking a question to which he had absolutely no interest in hearing the answer. One of the guards loosened his grip slightly. "Permission to speak. How generous." "I laughed," the human said flatly. Guy looked funny, covered in purple booze. "Pretty sure that's biology, not treason." The court gasped. Actually, gasped. Like she'd just announced her intention to marry the king's lunch, or something equally scandalous. The Valdorians really needed to get out more. King Vorthan's skin shifted to a deep, angry crimson. "Humans," he said, and the word dripped with enough contempt to strip paint, "have been a plague upon this sector since your world was inducted into the Empire. You lack proper hierarchical respect. You question authority. You find humor in the most sacred of traditions. Sacred traditions like wearing a hat made of live insects," the human muttered. The king stood. When a Valdorian king stood, everyone else was supposed to kneel, but the human was already being held down by roughly 400 pounds of reptilian muscle, so she got a pass on etiquette. "The pits," Vorthan declared, "let the arena decide your fate." Now the pits were not actually pits. They were a massive gladiatorial arena that could hold 50,000 spectators, featured the most advanced holographic projection systems in the sector, and sold overpriced fried protein clusters that tasted like disappointment. But calling them the arena of judicial combat and recreational blood sport didn't have quite the same ring to it. So the pits, it was. The interesting thing about the pits, and by interesting we mean horrifying, was that they operated under the ancient Valdorian principle of trial by combat. The accused fought the arena's champion. If they won, they were innocent. If they lost, well, they were very thoroughly dead, which made the whole guilt or innocence thing somewhat academic. In the 300-year history of the pits, exactly 0 accused had won. The current champion was a battleborn named Hex. The battle-born were what happened when evolution decided to create the perfect killing machine, and then gave it anger management issue. 8 feet tall, covered in interlocking armor plates that were actually part of his skin, with 4 arms that could each bench press a small shuttle. He'd held the championship for 6 years, which translated to roughly 218 consecutive victories. His last opponent had lasted 14 seconds. That was considered a good showing. The guards hauled the human to her feet and began the long march to the arena. The palace connected to the pits through a tunnel system that had been designed for exactly this purpose, moving the condemned from sentencing to execution with maximum efficiency and minimum escape opportunity. The walls were smooth, the doors were sealed behind them, and the whole thing sloped gradually downward, in a way that made it feel like being swallowed by a very orderly, very bureaucratic snake. The sound hit first. Even through the thick walls, the roar of the crowd vibrated through the stone. 50,000 Valdorians and visiting species from across the empire, all gathered to watch someone die. It was the most popular form of entertainment in the sector, which said some truly depressing things about galactic civilization. The human's heart hammered. Humans weren't built for arena combat. They weren't built for much, really. No natural armor, no venomous fangs, no redundant organs. Just soft skin, breakable bones, and a really impressive capacity for doing stupid things, despite knowing better. That last part was currently working overtime. The final door opened, and sunlight, artificial but convincing, flooded the tunnel. The arena floor stretched ahead, covered in sand that had been stained various suspicious colors by previous entertainment. The crowd's roar became deafening, a wall of sound that pressed down like a physical weight. Across the arena, another door opened. Hex emerged, and the crowd somehow got louder. He moved with the confidence of something that had never lost, never doubted, never had to consider the possibility of failure. His armor plates shifted and locked with each step, a living fortress that just happened to be excellent at killing things. He carried it was comically large, the kind of weapon that shouldn't be physically possible to wield, but made perfect sense in the hands of something built like a walking tank. The blade gleamed in the sunlight, and the human realized with a distant, detached sort of horror that the edge was monomolecular. It didn't just cut through things, it cut through the space things occupied. The guards released her at the arena's edge, and stepped back through the door. It sealed behind them with a hiss of hydraulics and finality. King Vorthan's voice boomed across the arena, amplified by speakers built into the walls. "Let the trial commence. May the guilty be punished and the innocent be freed." The crowd cheered. They always cheered. Half of them had money riding on how long she'd last. The humans stood alone in the sand, watching the champion approach with measured, confident steps. No weapon, no armor, no chance. Hex stopped 10 feet away, his eyes, all 6 of them, focused on her with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Then he did something that nobody expected, something that had never happened in the pit's entire history. He reached down, drew a second sword from his belt, and threw it. The blade spun through the air and embedded itself in the sand directly in front of the human's feet, quivering with the force of impact. The arena fell silent. Hex's voice, when he spoke, carried across the sudden quiet like thunder. "Pick it up." The crowd erupted into chaos. The thing about chaos in a gladiatorial arena was that it had a very specific sound profile. First came the gasps, then the confused murmuring, then the angry shouting as people realized their carefully placed bets might be in jeopardy. Somewhere in the upper decks, a bookie was probably having a complete nervous breakdown. The human stared at the sword. It was Valdorian made, which meant it was probably worth more than her entire planet's GDP, and it was currently offering her the galaxy's most expensive choice: pick it up and die fighting, or stand there and die pathetically. "Pick it up," Hex repeated, and this time there was an edge to his voice. Not threat, exactly. More like frustration at having to repeat himself to someone who should already understand what was happening, which was rich, considering nobody understood what was happening. King Vorthan's voice cut through the noise like a knife through something considerably softer than itself. "Champion, explain yourself. This is not protocol." Hex didn't even turn to face the royal box. His 6 eyes remained locked on the human. The pits exist to test guilt or innocence through combat. Combat requires 2 fighters. I will not execute an unarmed opponent. That is murder, not justice. The legal technicality landed like a grenade in a library. The Valdorian justice system ran on tradition, and tradition said the champion's word in the arena was absolute. But tradition also said, executions should be quick, entertaining, and boost merchandise sales. This was getting complicated. The human's hand moved before her brain fully processed the decision. Fingers wrapped around the sword's hilt, and she pulled it from the sand. It was lighter than expected, balanced in a way that suggested someone had put actual thought into making it deadly. The blade hummed slightly, vibrated at a frequency that made her teeth itch. "Good," Hex said, and there was something in his tone that might have been approval, or indigestion. Hard to tell with Battleborn. The crowd's volume dropped to a confused simmer. This wasn't in the script. The condemned were supposed to beg, or scream, or occasionally try to run before being cut down for everyone's amusement. They weren't supposed to arm themselves and square off like this might be an actual fight. What the spectators didn't know, what couldn't be known without accessing classified military files buried 6 layers deep in Imperial intelligence databases, was that Hex had watched the security footage from the palace incident 17 times. He'd seen the human laugh at Duke Phoenix, yeah, but he'd also seen what happened 3 seconds before that laugh. Duke Phoenix, in his infinite wisdom and finite coordination, had stumbled backward while drunk, knocked over a serving attendant, and sent glorious juice flying directly into his own face. The human had instinctively reached out, caught the falling attendant before she hit the ground, and steadied her with the kind of reflexes that spoke to actual training. Then she'd laughed. Because come on, it was objectively funny. The laugh was reflex. The save was and instinct was what the Empire had spent 2 centuries trying to breed out of its subjects. Hex had fought humans before, 3 times actually. All 3 had been soldiers from the border conflicts, warriors with training and experience. All 3 had lost, because a Battleborn was simply better built for violence. But all 3 had adapted mid-fight, changed tactics, tried things that weren't in any manual. One had nearly taken his eye out with a move that shouldn't have been physically possible given the human's skeletal structure and the laws of momentum. Humans were dangerous not because they were strong, they were dangerous because they refused to accept that being outmatched meant being beat. The king's voice crackled across the arena again. "This is irregular, Champion Hex. You will proceed with the execution immediately, or you will be found in contempt of judicial process." "Can't," Hex called back, and he almost sounded cheerful about it. Ancient law. Section 3 of the Arena Codes. Once weapons are drawn, the trial proceeds to conclusion. Both fighters must engage until surrender or death. Somewhere in the crowd, a legal scholar was probably having the time of his life confirming this in the historical record. Somewhere else, the king was definitely considering adding a new law about smart-mouthed champions. The human adjusted her grip on the sword. Her stance was wrong. All wrong by Valdorian stand. Weight too far forward. Blade held at an angle that left her open to approximately 12 different killing strikes. But there was something in her eyes that made Hex's blood sing with anticipation. She wasn't looking at him like he was an execution. She was looking at him like he was a problem to solve. "I don't suppose," she said, voice carrying across the sand. "There's a clause in those ancient laws about time-out periods, maybe some preliminary stretching." The crowd laughed. Actual laughter. The condemned had made a joke, and it landed. King Vorthan's skin shifted through several colors that probably correlated to various types of rage. Hex's mandibles clicked together in the Battleborn equivalent of a grin. "No timeouts, but I will give you first move. Courtesy. How generous." The human muttered, "Getting killed by the polite murderer. My ancestors would be so proud." She shifted her weight, testing the sand beneath her feet. It was deep, loose, designed to slow movement and make footing treacherous. Advantage to the heavier fighter, which was emphatically not her. The sun beat down from above, artificial but hot. No shade, no cover, nowhere to hide. Just open sand, a sword she barely knew how to hold, and a walking nightmare with 4 arms and centuries of killing experience. The human did the only thing that made sense. She attacked first. The crowd roared its approval as she charged forward, blade high, and Hex moved to meet her with the inevitability of a closing trap.
The first thing everyone learned about arena combat was that charging straight at a Battleborn was suicide. The second thing they learned was usually nothing, because they were dead. The human apparently had missed orientation day. Her opening strike was textbook terrible. Overhead swing. Too much wind up. Telegraphed so clearly that the people in the cheap seats could have called it out. Hicks sidestepped with almost casual efficiency, his axe coming around in a counter that should have separated her torso from her legs. Should have. The human twisted mid-charge, momentum carrying her past him instead of into him, and the axe blade whistled through empty air where her midsection had been a fraction of a second earlier. She hit the sand in a roll that was more controlled fall than technique, came up 5 feet away and immediately scrambled sideways as Hicks's second strike carved a trench through the ground she'd just vacated. The crowd's roar shifted pitch. That was interest. Not good, not impressive, but interesting. Most fighters tried to block or parry a battleborn's strikes. This one had apparently decided that being somewhere else was a better strategy, which showed either wisdom or cowardice depending on your perspective. Hicks approved, mostly because it meant the fight would last longer than 8 seconds. "You've never held a sword before," he observed, advancing with measured steps. "Your grip is wrong. Your stance is terrible. You hold it like a farming implement." Funny thing about farming implements, the human panted, backing away and keeping her blade between them. They're designed to cut through tough, stubborn things. Really makes you think. She darted forward, feinted high, then swept low at his leg. The move was creative, probably improvised on the spot, and would have worked beautifully against something with a human center of gravity. Against a battleborn with 4 legs arranged in a tripod configuration, it accomplished exactly nothing except making her overextend. Hicks's lower right arm lashed out, grabbed her wrist and yanked her forward. His upper left arm came down like a hammer toward her head. The human dropped the sword, just let it go completely, went limp in his grip, and the sudden dead weight combined with her forward momentum meant his strike passed over her head close enough to ruffle her head. She kicked upward with both legs, caught him in what might charitably be called a torso, and the impact had roughly the same effect as kicking a cargo transport, which was to say no effect whatsoever, except now she was airborne. Hicks threw, not hard, because killing her in 3 moves would defeat the entire purpose of this exercise. She hit the sand 12 feet away, rolled with the impact and came up coughing but mobile. "You adapt quickly," Hicks said, retrieving her dropped sword and tossing it back to her. "Good. Most species fight the same way twice. Humans seem incapable of this." The human caught the sword, barely, and the crowd actually cheered. They were getting into this now, invested in the narrative. The helpless victim was becoming something else, something more interesting than scheduled programming. King Vorthan's amplified voice cut through the noise. "Champions, cease this mockery and execute the condemned. This has gone on long enough." Hicks ignored him completely. His attention was fixed on the human, who was currently breathing hard and probably reassessing every life choice that had led to this moment. "Tell me," Hicks said, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "what you know about the Empire's expansion into Sector 4. The question came out of nowhere, landed like a verbal ambush. The human blinked, confused. "What? Sector 14, border colonies. Your species' introduction to Imperial law. Answer the question." She circled right, keeping distance between them, trying to figure out what game he was playing. "We got conquered, pretty straightforward. Your fleets showed up. Our defenses were garbage by comparison, and suddenly we're all citizens of the glorious Valdorian Empire. Lucky us. And how many ships did the Empire lose in that conquest?" The human's expression shifted. Understanding dawned, mixed with something that might have been anger. 47. Because we didn't have the sense to surrender when we were beat. 47 warships, Hicks repeated, advancing slowly, against a pre-space flight civilization with projectile weapons and chemical propulsion. The projections said you would fold in hours. Instead, you cost the Empire more tonnage than the previous 15 conquests He struck without warning, a genuine attack this time, and the human barely deflected it. The impact nearly knocked the sword from her hands, sent her stumbling sideways. "You fought from the ground when your ships were destroyed," Hicks continued, pressing forward. "From buildings when your bases fell, from tunnels when your cities burned. Every time the Empire thought humans were finished, you adapted, changed, found a new way to be irritating. Another strike, another desperate parry. The human was giving ground steadily now, being herded toward the arena wall. "The Empire fears you," Hicks said, and his voice carried across the arena. "Not because you're strong, you're not. Not because you're smart, you're average at. The Empire fears you because you refuse to accept the universe as it is." The human's back hit the wall, trapped. Hicks raised his axe for what should have been the killing blow. She threw a handful of sand directly at his eyes. All 6 of Hicks roared, more from surprise than pain, and his strike went wide. The human ducked under his arms, slashed across his midsection in passing, and the blade actually bit through the outer layer of his armor plating. Not deep, barely a scratch, but the first blood drawn in the entire fight. The crowd lost its collective mind. The human didn't stop moving. She ran, circled around him, kept low, and used his momentary blindness to reposition. By the time Hicks cleared his vision, she was 20 feet away, breathing hard but grinning like she'd just solved a particularly difficult equation. "Average at best," she called out. "I'm going to take that personal." Hicks felt his battle fury rising, the genetic imperative that made Battleborn the perfect soldiers. But underneath it, something else stirred. Something that felt dangerously close to respect. "The king sentenced you for laughing at nobility," Hicks said, and he made sure every word carried to the royal box. "But what you actually did was save a servant from injury, showed compassion to someone below your station, put another being's safety before your own dignity." He advanced again, but slower now, testing. "That is why you're here. Not because you broke a law, because you demonstrated that humans value individuals over hierarchy. And that terrifies an empire built on submission." The human's grin faded. Her eyes went to the royal box, then back to Hicks. "So what? This is some kind of object lesson? Die to prove the empire's point?" "No," Hicks said, and he lowered his axe slightly. "This is a test, and you're passing." The fight resumed, but it had changed. Hicks was no longer executing. He was training, pushing, forcing the human to think and adapt and survive. And the crowd, 50,000 beings from across the empire, watched as something unprecedented unfolded in the ancient sand. The prey had become a fight, and the champion had become something far more dangerous than an executioner. He'd become a teacher. The fight lasted another 7 minutes, which in arena terms was approximately 6 minutes and 50 seconds longer than anyone had expected. By the end, the human was covered in sand, bleeding from a dozen shallow cuts, and moving like every muscle in her body had filed a formal complaint. But she was still standing, still holding the sword, and still very much alive. Hicks could have ended it at any point. Everyone in the arena knew this. The human knew this. King Vorthan, watching from his royal box with a face that had cycled through every color in the visible spectrum, and several that probably weren't, definitely knew this. The final exchange came when the human, exhausted and running on fumes that had themselves run out of fumes, tried one last desperate lunge. Hicks caught the blade between 2 of his hands, twisted it free from her grip, and swept her legs out from under her with his axe handle. She hit the sand hard, stayed down, and the entire arena held its breath. Hicks planted his axe in the ground and extended one massive hand downward. The human stared at it, then at him, then at the hand again, as if checking whether it might be some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by repeated head trauma. "The trial is concluded," Hicks announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "The accused has demonstrated courage, adaptability, and the will to survive against impossible odds. By the ancient laws of the pits, I declare her worthy." He pulled her to her feet. The crowd's reaction was a confused mess of cheers, boos, and the sound of approximately 3,000 people demanding refunds simultaneously. King Vorthan stood so quickly his throne of compressed starlight actually flickered. "This is unacceptable." The human was found guilty. The sentence was death. "You will execute her immediately, or you will be stripped of your title and executed yourself." "Can't," Hicks said, and he sounded almost cheerful about the whole constitutional crisis he'd just triggered. Section 7 of the Arena Code. Once the champion declares a fighter worthy, they are pardoned of all crimes and granted citizenship with full rights. Even kings must respect the ancient laws. The legal scholar in the crowd was definitely having a moment, probably levitating with joy while simultaneously having a panic attack about the precedent this set. Chancellor Yeek appeared at the king's side, whispering urgently. His face, which normally held the expression of someone who'd just bitten into a lemon made of smaller, more bitter lemons, had gone completely blank. After a moment, he nodded reluctantly. "The champion is correct," Yeeks announced, and each word sounded like it was costing him physical pain. "The ancient laws supersede royal decree. The human is pardoned." The crowd's volume somehow increased. Half were celebrating the spectacle. The other half were rioting because their bets had just evaporated. The bookies were definitely having that collective nervous breakdown now. King Vorthan's skin settled on a purple so dark it was almost black. This precedent is dangerous. If others learn that defying the crown leads to mercy, then the order of the empire crumbles. "Then perhaps," Hicks said, and his voice carried a weight that silenced even the rioting spectators, "the empire should reconsider building its order on fear." The words landed like a bomb in a crystal shop. You didn't question the empire's methods. You didn't suggest alternative. You definitely didn't do it in front of 50,000 witnesses and live broadcast feeds to 6,000 planets. But Hex was the champion, undefeated, beloved by the masses. Firing him would cause riots. Executing him would cause revolution. And everyone in that arena, from the king down to the lowest spectator, knew it. The human, still breathing hard and probably running through her own list of things that had just happened, finally found her voice. "So I'm just free. That's no other catches or surprise executions scheduled for next week. You're free," Hicks confirmed. "Also unemployed and homeless, since your previous residence was seized by the crown, but technically alive, which seems like a win given the circumstances." "Fantastic," she muttered. "Survived an execution just to die of poverty. Very efficient." "Actually," Hicks said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he'd been planning this part all along. "The arena codes also state that any fighter declared worthy may join the champion's household as a trainee, if they accept." The human's eyes narrowed. "You're offering me a job, after trying to kill me for 7 minutes. Technically I was testing your survival instincts. The killing was incidental. That's not better. That doesn't make it better." Hicks's mandibles clicked in amusement. "The empire spans 6,000 worlds. On every one of those worlds are humans who've been conquered, subjugated and taught that their place is at the bottom. Most accept this. But some don't. Some keep fighting, keep adapting, keep refusing to accept the universe as it." He gestured around the arena, at the crowd, at the cameras broadcasting this across the sector. Today 50,000 beings watched a human fight a battleborn and survive. Not because she was stronger, not because she was better armed, but because she refused to give up. That message is now spreading across the empire. The human processed this. "You started a propaganda campaign. Using me. I started a truth campaign," Hicks corrected. "Using you. There's a difference. Propaganda would require me to exaggerate your capabilities. I'm wounded. My pride is wounded. Your everything is wounded. You need medical attention, training and probably therapy. In that order." Hicks turned to face the royal box directly. "The pits accept all who are sentenced. Noble or common, guilty or innocent. We enforce the king's justice, but we also enforce the ancient laws, and those laws say that strength, courage and the will to survive matter more than bloodlines or station." King Vorthan said nothing. What could he say? The champion had outmaneuvered him using the empire's own traditions, broadcasted to everyone watching, and made it impossible to retaliate without looking like he was afraid of his own laws. The silence stretched. Then, finally, the king sat back down. "The human is pardoned," he said, voice flat. "Take your new trainee and leave my sight." Hicks bowed, the gesture dripping with just enough respect to be technically proper while somehow still feeling insulting. He turned and walked toward the arena exit, the human limping along beside him. "So," she said quietly, "what happens now?" "Now," Hicks glanced down at her. "Now you learn to actually hold a sword properly. Maybe some basic footwork. Possibly how to not get thrown across an arena like a rag doll. Educational. Very. Also, you're going to help me identify others like you. Humans who refuse to accept that being conquered means being broken. We're going to train them. Teach them. Show them that the Empire's order isn't as permanent as it pretends to be." The human was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what he was suggesting. A resistance movement built not on rebellion, but on the Empire's own legal framework. Using the pits, the most public symbol of imperial justice, to create warriors who wouldn't bow. That's insane, she said finally. That's going to get us both killed. Probably, Hicks agreed cheerfully. But you've already survived one execution today. What's one more? They walked through the tunnel, leaving behind the roaring crowd and the furious king, and the smoking remains of several thousand betting pools. Above them, news feeds were already spreading across the empire, carrying footage of the fight, the declaration, the precedent that had just been set. On 6,000 worlds, humans watched and wondered, if one untrained civilian could survive the pits, what could they do? The Valdorian Empire had 347 laws designed to maintain order, but they'd forgotten the most important rule of conquest. The harder you squeeze, the more likely something is to slip through your fingers. And humans, as it turned out, were exceptionally good at slip. Somewhere in the depths of the royal palace, King Vorthan was probably adding a new law, something about limiting the champion's authority, or restricting arena traditions, or possibly just banning humans from existing near anything important. But laws took time to implement, and time was what the Empire had just run out of. The human looked up at Hicks as they emerged into the street, where the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of orange and gold. I don't even know your full name. Hicks Tharian Battleforged, third of the Crimson Peaks Warhost, holder of 43 battle honors and bearer of the Champion's Mark. That's quite a mouthful. Your people call me Hicks. It's simpler. What should I call you? The Battleborn considered this. Teacher, probably, since that's what I am now. And what do you call me? Hicks's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Trouble, because that's what you're going to be. They walked together through the city streets, an unlikely pair that had just rewritten the rules of an empire. Behind them, the arena still buzzed with energy, controversy, and the sounds of bookies having complete emotional breakdowns. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, danger, and the kind of foolish optimism that only humans seemed capable of maintaining in the face of overwhelming odds. It was going to be an interesting few years. The Empire had sentenced her to the pits. The champion had offered her a sword, and in doing so he'd accidentally handed humanity something far more dangerous than any weapon: hope, which in retrospect was exactly what he'd intended all along.